Good afternoon, dear students. So I'm meeting you with another class. So today we are going to discuss databases. So what do you know about databases? Have you studied databases before? Hope you have studied databases, right? So what do you mean by database? Database is going to be a collection of information, or in our uh, way of looking at it, we are going to say it is going to be in a form of a table with rows and columns, and you are going to store your records inside those tables. Okay. So here in Visual Basic, what are we going to do is we have only so far discussed the front end of the application programming language. So what I mean by the front end is the design part of it. So any application will have two sides. One is the front end, which is going to be the design part, where you have the text boxes, the radio buttons, the command button, and so on. So it also has the other part, which is called as the back end, where you store the data. So that's where we are going to access. That's what we are going to access today from the front end. So we are going to learn how do we first create a database, how do we create a table, how do we add fields or attributes inside the table, and how do we connect that with the front end is what we are going to discuss in today's class. Okay. Hope you'll enjoy the class. Let's move on. Here there are basically two access techniques, DAO and ADO. So these are the two techniques we have in the syllabus. So what do you mean by DAO is data access object. So this is a very simple object wherein it can work, you can work with simple databases like Microsoft Access. So we are going to be using only Microsoft Access and creating databases for this particular topic. So it's going to be done using a data object. This data object is called as data access object. So DAO, data access object. So what is this used for? This will act like an interface. So you will be able to connect your database with the front end, which is nothing but your VB design. Okay. So we will be creating a database. Then we have DAO, which is going to be an interface which will help you in connecting your database with the front end, so that you will be able to see the data from the front end. You will be able to manipulate, access the data from the front end. So that is going to be, that's going to be the target of today's class, right? Data access objects. Okay, so this data access object is the simplest technique I told you. Other than that, we also have other objects. So let us see what the other objects are. The next one is called as ADO, which is ActiveX data object. So I told you this data access object DAO is used to connect the database to the front end. So here again, this is also going to be another object which is going to be used for connecting the database to the front end. But what could be the difference? What do you mean by ActiveX? What do you mean by ActiveX? Can you recall what we saw? ActiveX controls are the controls which is not available in your toolbox, but you have to pick them up from where? From components. So this is another control which can be used for advanced databases. So how are you going to pick them? You have to go to components and pick those particular data objects. So that data object is called as ActiveX data objects. It's called as ActiveX data object. It can be used for advanced databases, right? The third one is called as RDO. RDO is a third type of data object, though we don't cover it in our syllabus, but still you should know what is RDO. RDO stands for remote data object. So what do you mean by remote data object? So what do you mean by remote? A database is going to be present in a remote location. So this database is not going to be present in your system, but rather it is going to be present in a remote location. Say for example, in another geographical area. Your data server is going to be in another geographical area where you have to access it. Then you have to use these objects known as RDO objects. Okay. So let me again summarize. So data can be accessed, okay, using these three objects. So we have DAO, ADO and RDO. DAO stands for data access objects, ADO stands for ActiveX data objects, and RDO stands for remote data objects. Okay. These database objects are actually meant to interface your database and your front end, which is your VB design. Your front end here is nothing but the design which we have, which is your VB design. Okay, so let us see what are the uses of this. So what all you can do with these interfaces or these data objects, what are the things you can do. So let us see what it is. The first thing we are going to discuss is going to be, today we are only going to discuss data access objects, which is DAO. We are not going to discuss ADO. Only DAO we are going to discuss today. The next class we will see what is ADO. Okay, so today let us see what is data access objects. What do you remember about data access objects? Can you recall? It is used to create, it's used for connecting simple databases. That's the first and foremost thing is these are used to interface with simple databases. For example, Microsoft Access. That's what I have told you about data access object. It is going to be acting as an interface to connect your database with your front end. Okay, let us move on. Yes, so let us see some features of data access object. So what is the purpose of it? How can you use it? So let us go through point by point. It is used in small databases. I did tell you that. So I told you today we are going to use MS Access, Microsoft Access, and we are going to create a database and try connecting that database to the front end. That's what we are going to do. Similarly, there are other databases also. So we used to have a database called DBase, FoxPro. So these were the databases which were there earlier. So of which database is now in use. Okay. So apart from that, you have little advanced databases like Oracle, SQL Server, and so on. So this is how we store data. So we are going to store data in all these databases. Right. The next point is going to tell you what is the primary work of your data object. So in this case, it is data access object. What is the primary work? I told you it is going to form an interface. How can it do that? So for that, it has to first connect to the database. So what it will do? It will first connect to the database. So what do you mean by database? I said database is the place where you store information or data. So it's a place where you're going to store information or data. A database can contain many tables inside it. It can contain more number of tables inside it. For example, let us say a student database. So what information can a student database have? So for example, here in college, what are the things we store about a student? We are going to store attendance details, the contact details of the students, the marks, maybe the internal marks details. We are also going to have a database where we are going to store the external or the university marks. So apart from that, there is a database which is going to store your parents' data, the contact data, and so on. Then there is accounts data, your admission data. So there are these kind of data available. So all these data will be stored under one head called the student database. So inside that, all these things will all be segregated as tables. So you will have all these tables. So for example, you have table which is going to store your attendance, store your marks, and so on. So those are going to be the tables. So you have a database inside which you have multiple tables, right? So the next use of data access object is it is used to open a table. You can also open the table and access the records. That is the main purpose, right? First of all, what it should do, first it should connect to the database. The database will have various tables inside it. So when the tables are there, your DAO will be able to, it won't be able to create a table, but it can access the table which is already created. So the table should be already created. It should have data inside it. Then your DAO can be used to retrieve or access that data. How the accessing is happening? Accessing is going to happen using a query. Say for example, select star from table name. So this is one example query wherein you can retrieve the data. How can you do that? Yes, there is a data available in your table, but virtually you create a record set. So how are you creating that record set? Is using a query. So you can use it, you create a command or a record set using queries. Okay, so this is called as a virtual table, which means it is going to extract data from the actual table as and when you want it and how you want it. So based on some condition, also you can select the data from the table. So it forms a virtual table so that you can access that virtual table. Right. The next one is, so how accessing, I said accessing a virtual table. What do you mean by accessing a virtual table? Accessing means you can add new records, you can delete the existing record. So what you can save, any changes made can be saved to your database. Then you can also move to the records. Say for example, I can move to the first record or I can move to the last record. I can search the record. I can move to the next record. I can move to the previous record and so on. Okay. Moving to the first record, moving to the last record, moving to previous and next. These four operations are known as navigation. Okay. Now you are navigating from the first record to the last record. So these four operations are called as navigation. Apart from that, you also have operations where you add a new record, you save a record, you delete a record, and so on. So these are the operations which you are going to do onto the database. This is how you manipulate the database. Okay, these are the manipulations available with the DAO for manipulating your database or accessing your database. The last point is very important. You would not have heard of this term, okay, but you should remember that. So when you see the example which I'm going to show you today, you will definitely understand what you mean by a data bound. So you have not actually heard of this term called data bound controls. There are some certain controls which are known as data bound controls. So one of the control is going to be a DB grid, database grid, for example. One is going to be a database grid. So we have already seen a grid called flex grid. If you remember, in your vending machine program, we have seen a flex grid wherein you are going to store data and retrieve data from that particular table. Here what are we going to do is, this data grid is going to be, the look wise it is going to be very similar to your flex grid. The only thing is it will be connected to a ADO object. So for example, it will be connected to a data access object, which is in turn connected to a database and in turn connected to a table. So you will be able to access or bring all those data from the table, and you will be able to see it in form of a table. You can see it in form of a table where you have rows and columns. So how would you do that? You do that using a control. For example, you can do that using a control called database grid. Okay, so any control which you are able to connect to a data access object and in turn connect to the database, that kind of control is called as data bound control. So data bound control is control which can connect to the database and fetch the data from that particular database. So these are called as data bound controls. We will see some examples of data bound control. So what do you mean by data bound control? We are going to see. Okay, even a text box can be used as a data bound control. I will tell you how it can be done. So with the example, as of now, these are the features. Quickly I will run through it. First thing, it is used for small databases, example MS Access. Then how do you connect to a database? Is using a ADO. You have to first connect to the database, then you have to open a created table, fetch those records in a virtual table, and then what you do is you're going to do the manipulations like adding, deleting, saving, moving. So all these navigations I told you. So these operations can be done on a database using DAO. Apart from that, there is also something known as data bound control. So DAO also is useful when you have to connect them with the data bound controls. So which can fetch the data from the database and display it for the user. Okay, so these are the features of a DAO. Hope you have understood. Yes, we'll move on. Right. So what are the properties of a DAO? DAO is a control. It is a control just like your text box. It's a control just like your radio button and command button. So it also has the properties window where we are going to see some important properties. So how do we, first for me to connect a database with a DAO, I want some basic properties to be set. So this only is a list of those basic properties. Okay. First and foremost property is called as connection string. Okay, so remember this term, connection string. This connection string is going to be giving you the information about the database. So where the database is present, so that the DAO can connect with the database. So this connection string is going to have information to establish a connection. Okay, information like, for example, where the database exists. So the path of the database. So apart from that, there are a lot of properties which you have to set. Okay, so you have to remember that connection string is going to be giving you information to establish a connection. So that is the work of the connection string. That is the first property. Second property is the lock type. So I have decided to access the database. So what is the lock set there? So we have already discussed in DBMS also. We have discussed recently also we discussed about lock types in files. Okay, so similarly here also you have to say whether it is read and write together or only read. So all these kind of locks you have to be sure. So you have to set those locks. So lock type has to be set. Next comes the record source, right? So how you have to remember it is in this order. So there is a connection string which is going to tell you where the database is going to exist or where the database is stored. Okay, so connection string is going to tell you where the database is stored. Now I know that there is a database there. Next thing I should know it, what is the record source? Where are the records present? Where are the records which I wanted to access are present? Obviously, those records are going to be present inside tables. Okay, I will first connect to the database, then see which is my table where my records are stored. So first that connection has to be established. Okay, so now I have to connect to the table. So how do I do that? Using a property called record source. Record source will tell you the source, which is nothing but your table. Okay, so that's going to be your table name. right? So as soon as I get access to my table names, what will be present inside my table? What are the things present inside my table? You're going to have records. Yes, very good. So you're going to have records present inside the table. So the next thing you should know about, next property you should know about is the record set property. Record set is very simple. It is set of all records. That's it. Okay. So it's going to be set of all records. What records are those? They are the records wherein your connection string is pointing to. Your connection string is pointing to a database, and your record source is going to tell you which table it is. So all the records present in this particular category are going to be my record set. So they are going to be my record set. So it's very easy to remember the properties. First property is connection string, which is helpful in establishing a connection between your DAO and your database. The next one is you have to say where is the data. So data will be present inside a table. So you have to say what is the record source. So record source is nothing but your table name. The next property you have to set is called as record set. It is nothing but set of all records. So it's going to be set of all the records. Yes. Yes. Of course, there is log property. Log property will decide whether you have access to the database. Primarily whether you are able to read, are you able to write, and these kind of, are there any logs present. So this is the information. So these are the some of the properties of a DAO which you should be familiar with, right? The next slide is going to be steps in creating a database. How can I create my database, right? So we will directly go to seeing how do I create my database. So we will come back to the other slides later. First I would like to take you to Visual Basic where you can create a database, right? So I'm going to go to, let us say, a new, so that I will show you how to create a database. Here, yes, this is your IDE, VB IDE. So what we are going to do is we are not going to go to MS Access. Okay, so there are two ways. You can first go and create the database in Microsoft Access. But Microsoft Access, which I have or you have, we have in the lab, is going to be the latest Office. But Visual Basic 6 is a very, very old edition. So there will be compatibility issues. So I will tell you a easier way, okay, which doesn't have any compatibility issues. So how do we do that? We will do that internally itself, inside VB itself. So how am I doing it? Click Adds In. So note down the steps. Okay, you have to take a notebook and pen, and you have to note down these steps, because we are going to have 3 lab programs based on this. So all these steps sometimes are confusing for some students. So if you practice it, you will get it. Okay. Yes. So Adds In Visual Data Manager. So you're making a note of it. Yes. Write down add-ins, ADDINS, add-ins. Okay. In your Visual Basic IDE or Visual Studio IDE, Visual Basic, you're going to create a database. Click on Visual Data Manager. Yes, a small window will pop up. Okay, so in this window, you're going to create the database. So this is the window. So I'm going to say File. Okay, what was the first step? Let me remind you again. Add-ins. In that, you have to click on Visual Data Manager. Right, now we are going to say File. I'm going to create a new database. So I'm going to say New. Right, so these are the types of database I told you. All these databases can be created. All these databases can be actually made use of in your VB environment, of which we are choosing Microsoft Access. And a version I'm going to use is 7. Right, so again remember the steps: File, New, Microsoft Access. Version I'm going to use is 7. Right, so I'm clicking on that. So now it is going to ask you for name of the database you're going to create. So let us say I'm going to create a database which is going to be called as product. So I'm going to say I'm going to create a database called product, or employee. Anything is fine. Employee is usually asked in exams. So let us create that. EMP is the table I'm going to create, right? So what I did, I clicked on adds. I clicked on adds in. Then I had to go to Visual Data Manager, from which I have created a new file. I said File, New, Microsoft Access, and it was version 7. Okay, so that has asked me to save the file. So first thing I'm doing is I'm saving the file. Okay, just check one more thing here. The file we are creating is a Microsoft Access file whose extension is .mdb. Whose extension is .mdb. So when I am searching for the file also, you should remember the extension of this file. So, okay, Microsoft Access database. Right. Save. So I've created a database. I told you first thing is you have to create a database, then you have to create table. Inside the table you're going to create record. So always remember this flow, right? Create a database, then create a table. Inside a table create all the records. So we are going to follow the same thing. What the first step we have done? We have created a database. Now I have to create a table inside a database. How will I do? Okay, please make a note. So just go to properties, right click, right, new table, right, go to properties, right click, new table, right. So this is the screen. Very few things you remember in the screen, it's enough. You don't have to worry about all this. Basic, creating a basic database I will tell you. So don't worry about the other things now, right. Table name. So I told you EMP is my database. So I should have a table name. Inside my EMP database is going to store all the details of the employee. Okay. So I'm going to say basic details of the employee. I'm going to store inside a table called EMP details. I'm going to store it inside a table called EMP details. So first thing I said, new table, right click properties. You have to click on new table. Then I'm giving a name for the table. Okay. Don't forget. Next thing is I have to add fields. What do I mean by fields? The attributes, the columns, the attributes, right? First field is I have to say add field. Then I'm coming here. I'm going to say EMP ID, the usual things which we have done in DBMS, right? EMP ID. I'm keeping it as text. Okay. Then I'm going to say that's it. I have given the field. I have the type, data type is here set as text. Okay, I don't want to make any changes now. First time I'm creating a database. So let everything be default only, right? Okay. Next again, the next field has to be created. So employee ID is done. What is next? EMP name is the next one. EMP name is the next one. So EMP name, again, I'm going to have it as text only. Size, I'm going to keep it as 50. There is nothing I'm going to change. I'm going to say, okay. The last one I'm going to create is going to be called as basic salary. Basic salary. Basic salary, what I can do is, I can keep currency, I can keep long, I can keep double, whichever I want, right? So for now, let us only have two data types. One is going to be the text data type, and other one is going to be an integer data type. Okay, so let us store small values only. It's going to be only of 2 byte. Okay, you remember? So that's kind of a default value, right? So what we have done now, we have created 3 fields. First field was employee ID. Next one was employee name. This is the third one we are going to create, that is called as basic salary. Created. I'm going to close. Yes, I have done it. Employee ID, employee name, and basic salary. Right? Make a note of it. So we have clicked add field once and we were able to create all the fields. Then we have to click close button so that we'll come back to this particular screen. Right? Before building the database, this is a build database. Before that, you have to remember adding a primary key, which we usually do, right? It is a custom, right? So we have to add a primary key so that you will not have any problem in accessing the data. You can access the data based on this unique index, which is your primary key. Okay, so I'm going to add that index now. Add index. So how do I add index? First of all, I should give a name for the index. I'm going to say ID index. Some name, any name is fine. ID index is what I have given. Which is these are the available fields. It shows which one you want it to be a primary key. Can I have name as primary key? Can I have salary as primary key? No, it may repeat. So I'm going to have employee ID as my primary key. So I'm going to click on employee ID, and the primary key has these two properties, which is primary and unique. Okay, not null also is included. If you don't want not null, you can say ignore not null. So I'm not doing any of it. It is going to be null, primary, unique. All these not null, primary, unique, all these 3 things are going to be there. Yes, close the database. Right. What have we done now? We have created the fields, right? And we have also created a primary key. So the table structure is ready now. We have designed the table structure, right? I have to click on build the table. So that is going to be very, very important. Remember, build the table. Don't close it. Whatever work we have done will be gone. So you have to click build a table. So it is going to build a table here. It is build a table. So this is going to be the database name. EMP is going to be the database name. EMP details is going to be your table name. So let me click and see whether the fields are there. So these are the fields which I have created. So everything is there. I have successfully created a table. First I created a database inside which I have created a table. So now I have added the fields also. So what is my next step? Yes, yeah, I have to add my records. My data has to be added. So how do I do that? Yes, I just double click it, okay, and go here. Just double click your table, then you will get this particular window. So you have to add the records now. Okay, just remember these steps enough, right? Let me add. So click add. It will give you the screen where I'm going to say employee ID, some number I'm going to create 123 something, employee name, basic salary, right? Again I'm going to say employee ID, name, some basic salary. So let me create one more record maybe. Right, some salary is here, right? So what have we done now? We have added the record. So you can keep on doing it, add. If there is any correction you want to do, you can use edit, delete and all that. So usually we are only going to add the database. Okay, so I'm sorry, we are only going to add the records to the database. That is the only thing we are going to do. So I have done that. I'm going to close it now. So everything here is done. So we came here, we've said file new, created a new database, then we have said right click properties, we have to click new table, then we went to that particular screen wherein you gave the table name, then you have added all the fields, then you have set a primary key, and then you have built the table, and you came back, double click this employee ID, and you are able to add all the records. So we have created database, we have created a table, we have added records also. Okay, now the database part is ready. Okay, we have to design then. So now we have to design. Once the designing also is done, then we have to add this data object and try to interface between the database and the front end. So let us do that. So next step is going to be designing. So I'm going to come here. So that part is taken care. So designing, you can do whatever it is. I wanted to keep it very simple so that we don't consume a lot of time. How many fields we had? 2, 3. Right. So I'm going to have 3 text boxes here. So we have 3 text boxes here. Right. So let me tell you what each text box refers to. So it's going to be employee ID. Yeah, font is very small, but let's not waste time in changing that. Employee name. Doesn't matter if you are going to type something else, also doesn't matter. So this is not, labels are not important, right? Yes. Basic pay, basic salary, anything you type doesn't matter. Doesn't have any connection with your field names. Okay, that's what I was about to say. Right. So what we have done here is we have created a design. Let us assume we have created a design. I have created a database. I also have a design wherein I am trying to fetch the details in the database to this particular front end design. Okay. So database here is known as back end. This particular design is called as your front end. So you have to connect both these things. What do you need for connection? You need an interface, which is nothing but your data object. So data object which is already present here. It's called data access object, DAO. So I'm going to click on that, right? Keep it here, right? Okay, I've created my data access object. So what are the things that has to be done to data access objects? So we saw that in properties. So what you should do first, you have to connect to the database, and next you have to say which is the record source, and then you will be able to access the data. So we will do that. First thing, I'm going to connect to the database. So connect using MS Access, that I'm not going to change. So what I'm going to change is the database name is what I'm going to give. So let us see where we have saved the database. Here. So I have a folder called online classes. That's where I have created EMP, and I'm going to open it. Now what has happened, I have an interface called DAO. So that interface or data object is connected to the database, right? So I have to say I can have a number of tables inside a database. Though we have only created one, you can have more than one. So now it is my duty to say this data access object, what is the database I'm using? So what is that property? Data source. Okay, data source. So first was database. Second one, data source, is nothing but your table name. I told you data source is source of your data. Record source is nothing but the source of the data, where the data is stored. So record source is nothing but your table name. So I have set the table name here. That's it. Everything else is going to be default properties only. So there are two things which I have done. One is I went here and said which is the database name. Second thing is I have to say which is the record source. So where is the data stored? Right? So I have done this. Inside a record source or inside a table, what do you have? You have the actual records or the data. So how are we going to access it? We are going to see it. Right? So design is done. Database was created already. We also have the interface which you have connected to the database. Right? The last point, so which you may not remember, is nothing but your data bound controls. Right? So we are going to see little advanced data bound controls also, of which this simple text box also is a data bound. So what do you mean by data bound is these objects, okay, these text boxes will be connected with my ADO control. I'll have to connect it with ADO control so that all the records will be fetched in these particular text boxes. So I have to connect them with this data. Okay, so this particular DAO is called as data1. The name is going to be data1. So let us see how are you going to connect it. So I'm going to click on this text box, right? So here I have to say where is the connection. So where is that connection is going, how the connection is going to happen. How do I connect it? So I'm going to say my data is going to be from data1. So data source property has to be changed to data1. So I have to connect my text box with my ADO. Text box here is a data bound control because it is going to fetch the data from the database and display it on the text box. So how will I do it? First I should say which is my interface. My interface is data1, and in the data1 what is connected? Data1 already is connected to the database and also to the table. Okay, inside the table are the fields. So you are going to say this particular text box, which is the field that is going to be associated with it. So what field can we associate? So we can associate employee, we have to associate employee ID with this particular text one. So how are we going to do it? We have to go to data field property. First property we change is data source property. Now we are going to change the data field property and I'm going to say employee ID. Right? Can you see a connection that has happened? What have we done? We have created a database, then we created a front end, then we created an interface. Okay. Now these data bound controls are connected to the interface so that the data can be fetched. Okay. You understand? So when I execute, you will be able to see what has actually happened. Yes. So let me do the same thing for this also. Do you remember what are the two properties? First property is data source. Yes, very good. Hope some of you have remembered. Data source. Second one is the data field employee name. Here, again same thing. Data source first and then data field, because otherwise data field will be empty. So you have to first say which is the data source, only then these things will be listed in data field, right? So I have successfully connected them. So my intention is to fetch the data and manipulate and all those things also we are going to do. Now primarily I wanted to see if the data is available. Am I able to get the database values on my design? Okay, I should get my backend database values on my front end design. So is it proper? Is it happening? Is what I'm going to see now, right? So this is going to be my form design. So here we have employee ID, employee name and salary. So if I say click on this, the next record, click on this, the next record. We had 3 records. We are able to see all the 3 records. Yes, have we done that? The purpose of today's class was actually to see how this DAO can be used to interface with your front end and back end. So how did we do that? We did a connection. So this data should be connected to your database and table. And then in turn you have to connect to the records. This is what we have done. So this goes to this is the first record. This means the last record. So this is going to be the previous record. This is going to be the next record. You understand? This is how we have connected. Hope you have understood. Yes, it may seem to be a little confusing, but you have to practice, then it will be very easy. Steps are going to be very simple. So if you do that again and again, you try creating 10 times you try creating a database and connecting it to the front end. Okay, design you create once, database you create 10 times and try to connect it to the front end. Okay, automatically it will be very easy. You can write the steps even in your dreams. Okay, it's going to be that easy. Okay, believe me. Right. So have you understood this? Yes. Today's class we started with what do you mean by a database. Okay. Then we said in VB what is the use for a database. VB is a front end tool. What is the use? The use here is how do you connect the front end with the back end and how do you fetch the data. Right. So do you think anything is missing here? Whatever we have seen. Yes. Yeah, there is something missing. I said manipulating the data. So there is also another step to it, which is nothing but manipulating the data. So we are going to see that in the next class. Hope you enjoyed the class today. Thank you.